making their way here, but I figured we might as well start, try to stick to the hour. Lunch is at the back end, so I suppose if we go over a little bit, like it's just between us and eating. So I don't know, see if that's a good or bad thing. But I'm going to go ahead and just get us started. And my name's Kai Robertson. I'm going to facilitate the session today. We've got a great panelist, and I wanted to get a sense for actually what kind of knowledge is in the room. We're talking about farm level loss. I realize some of you may have no knowledge about what happens on the farm, and some of you may be farmers yourself or somewhere in between. So just by show of hands, how many of you feel like you know a lot about farming? Anybody? Oh, good. Quite a few people. How about no idea, like just new to farming and curious? All right, thank you for being honest. How many of you are actually maybe then in the middle of the chain? Do you buy from farmers, retail, food service? Okay, great, so about another half. Perfect, and anybody try to grow a tomato or basil or other zucchini, anything? Yeah, another bunch of us. So those of us who don't fall into those first two categories, we know how hard it is to grow food and to keep it alive and then to figure out what to do with it once you actually harvest it. And so take that and, at a massive scale, and that's basically what we're trying to tackle is what do we do with all the wonderful food that's grown and then doesn't get to people. So I'm going to give a little bit of context, and then we're going to turn to our panelists to give a little bit of insights from where they're coming from. Then we're going to have hopefully about 20, 30 minutes for Q&A and discussion amongst all of us. So let me go to a little bit of context here. I'm going to have to stand back here to get the mic. And I'll introduce the panelists as they come up. So myself, I'm an independent sustainability advisor. I've been working in this area for about 10 years. All of us are actually owners, I realized, of our own business. We all wear multiple hats, and which means that we all are nimble in different ways and pivot as we need to. So there's that common thread amongst all of us, as well as on this topic. So the reality, let's just talk a little bit about the reality of farm level surplus. There is a lot out there, and I struggle with numbers like 17.6 million tons of produce. That's the refed number of farm surplus in the United States. What does that mean in terms of tons? I mean, in terms of pounds is important for me because I think about I bought a pound of produce. I don't buy a ton, and that's 2,000 pounds, and I just can't conceptualize it. So what we're talking about is 35 billion, 200 million pounds of produce. That's surplus in just the United States. We're not talking about the rest of the world. And again, that's a quarter of the surplus based on refed's numbers. That's a lot. It's just second after residential. So there is a lot. To further contextualize it, it was helpful for me to put into truckloads as an example, because produce moves in trucks. All right, so what does that look like? If we took all that wasted produce, if we put it into big tractor trailers that carry 40,000 pounds, that would be 770,000 full truckloads just of produce, just in the US, and again, 770,000 trucks. What does that look like? That would stretch 5 times across the United States. So from here in Seattle to where I live in Virginia, once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, end-to-end trucks for that amount of produce. And to me, that's what I needed to actually explain to my husband about the scope of the problem, because he's like, well, what do you mean? What's 35 billion, 200 million pounds? It looks like it is a lot. And if we can visualize it in different ways, I think that makes it more meaningful to people to understand how much are we really talking about. And this is all food that's perfect. Most of it's perfectly good and just isn't getting eaten for a whole range of complex reasons. So where does this farm level surplus come from? It's really important to just also understand that there are a lot of stages in farming. And we've got Kamal who can talk to us about farming from his perspective. But there's the planting and the growing. That's not in scope. What we're talking about is what happens when something's harvestable. And once it's harvestable, it's a crop ready for harvest, it gets harvested. And then there's a whole range of post-harvest activities that take place depending on the type of farmer you are, the type of crop you're growing. But it could be transport, storage, grading, packing. And so during these post-harvest activities is where there's also loss. So where does it fall out? In the harvest stage, you get crop in an area that was not harvested for whatever reason, that just literally surplus or bad weather, you couldn't get into the field and you had to walk by. The more common reason for harvest level loss is that it was left in the field after a harvest was completed. The farmer had to make the decision, I'm done with harvesting, and there's still crop in the field, but I can't get to it because of a range of reasons, often economic. Don't have the labor, don't have a market, I've got to move on to the next field. Then post-harvest activities, food falls out there as well. And again, it could be because it was excess, simply surplus. It could have been spoiled for a range of reasons, spilled. human error happens, out of spec. Big reason. Wrong size, had a blemish, too big, too small, too ripe, not too ripe, different, wrong color. Lots of reasons for what was out of spec, and that was culled. And then after it goes through all stages, there's still the possibility that you get to market and it's rejected by the buyer. So Jeremy, our second panelist, will be talking about that, what happens with this rejections of crop that was already harvested. So comes from many different places. That's the main takeaway. I'm really simplifying this for the sake of just being a quick introduction. I'm going to use a tomato example because I think this helps understand, like, what does this really look like in the field. For a project with World Wildlife Fund, I went into the field with Dr. Lisa Johnson. There she is. Thank you, the illustrious Lisa. She has created this wonderful methodology for how you measure in-field surplus. And we went to a farmer who was growing tomatoes for the fresh market in the supermarket, going to the supermarket industry. And that's important because there are specs. A tomato can only be a certain size and green for this particular customer. And so everything you see up the top there was left in the harvest after harvest was over because it was mostly not, there was no market for it. And there was also a walk-by situation. There was a lot of rain while we were there. You can see that's all mud, a muddy furrow. They couldn't get back into the field, and most of that's red, so it was no longer something that was going to be suitable for the market. 100% edible. Really good-looking tomatoes, but not suitable for the market. And Kamal will talk a little bit about the rain situations and how rain, Mother Nature, affects farming. So when we look at this top picture, I want to share the 3 categories that Lisa developed as part of her measurement methodology, because they're really important because they get the root cause of why this is happening. There's going to be a certain amount that might be marketable. It should be, hopefully, for the grower, the smallest percentage, because that was crop that met specifications, was missed for some reason. Harvesters aren't perfect. Maybe there's a need for more training. Your intervention is very different if you have a marketable product still available. It could be you have to tweak the harvesting machine. That was 10% of this particular crop's what was left over, and we did just 3 samples of how much was left on the tomato vine. I'm just, the bottom picture there is us stripping the tomato vine. We literally went in, just stripped all the tomatoes off the vine and put them into this bucket. The edible, not marketable, that's 60%. That was perfectly edible, can be eaten. There was no existing market at that time for the product. That's the biggest bulk of product left in the field after harvest. And in this case, it was too ripe or too small, and then spoiled. Spoilage happens. It's Mother Nature after all, and that was around roughly 30% of the crop unfit for human consumption. So we did this, you do the math of the sampling that, again, thank you, Lisa. You extrapolate it up, scale it to the 18-acre field that this represented, and that was 90% crop utilization, good high percentage, but it's still 10% of potential. And the potential yield when you do the math is 95,000 pounds over 18 acres. Like, you could do a lot with 95,000 pounds of tomatoes, especially since 60% of that was still edible. So then the big question is, well, what and why are we not doing something with it? And that's what we're going to discuss. There is a lot of opportunity. I'm summing this up. Again, it's in the sake of simplification. There's stuff on the left side here that's about the enabling kind of foundational type information that helps to get to the solutions. It really helps to know the volume, and it really helps to know the root causes, because without that, you don't know what your real potential is and why it's really happening. So better identifying the produce-specific root causes is critical. I'm looking at Summer and Refed. We need to get more information on the causes of produce being left in the field, and data helps us tell us how much there is. Thank you. And there's a great tool at World Wildlife Fund that's created, the Global Farm Loss tool, that helps to aggregate some of that data. From a policy side or from a just financial side, you need to implement the right policies, find funding for innovation. And then, as importantly, on the right side, connections. That's what we're all here for at the summit. Connecting across supply chains is super important. And there's everything from looking at market consistency and profitable prices. I can't underscore that enough. Like, no grower is going to pick something that they can't make money off of because they don't want to go into the red simply to satisfy our, moral need to reduce food waste. That's not ethically and or financially responsible. So it's got to be profitable. There's an opportunity looking at specifications, maybe overproduction, cost constraints, extending shelf life, improving infrastructure for processing. We'll hear a little bit about that from Timothy as well, and alternative markets. Hunger relief groups, there's many of you all here in the room. And at the summit, we need to find options to get that surplus to those people in need. There's a logistical issue. And then overall, just like let's increase produce demand. Let's like encourage people to eat more produce so there's more of the surplus going into the channels. And then consumer expectations, we the people can also accept ugly looking, different looking fruits and vegetables. So that's the opportunity in a nutshell. And again, why this all matters. We want to feed people and we want to support farmers. So let's keep that in mind, like why we're focusing on reducing farm level surplus. 28.8 billion meals out of that 770,000 truckloads that could feed every food insecure household 2 meals a day for an entire year. That's a lot of food. If you're thinking about it from a financial perspective, that's $13 billion. And farmers, at the end of the day, they can't afford to harvest at a loss and sell to a buyer at a loss. So we need to find a way to capture that revenue as part of what we do in addressing more yield from the field. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Kamal, the baton about as a grower. I think I'm just like you guys to all introduce yourselves because there's a slide that has your name and title, but better to hear from you why you see this opportunity for more yield from the field as a grower of blueberries about 45 minutes, right, south from here.
Hello. It's always weird hearing your own voice. My name's Kamal Sidhu from Sidhu Farms. We grow about close to 100 acres of fruit down south in Puyallup, near Tacoma. And for us, food waste has always been on the mind. We, since very early on, we've always frozen our excess. We'll take a certain amount out to our retail markets. We do a lot of farmers markets and sell to small farm stands like our own. And anything that we can't sell that's harvested that day, we've always frozen. And we've just done that consistently for the last 25 years. We never really had much of a market for it other than the value-added products that we did ourselves. Like we did jam, we did like certain powders. One new thing that we're looking into doing is freeze drying and dehydrating. Like one example I like to give is like we always froze everything that we harvested, but at the same time, like we would have raspberry rows that were red, on the ground because we were only harvesting so much. So to combat that, we slowly over time have just become very specialized in what we grow. We're like 50 small farms instead of like one big farm growing one commercial product that goes out to like one wholesaler. We do almost 50 different varieties at like 1.5 to 2 acres a piece, and they all come at different times and stretch our season from early May all the way to the end of October. And I don't know how sustainable that is because it's a lot of work. That's, 5 months of, just consistent, full days worth of harvesting. And luckily we have the market to sell that directly to consumers.
I think, I'm realizing I don't have the right mic here.
Oh, here.
I apologize. No. I think what's really fascinating too is the fact that you're at the whims of what happens in the external world. Yeah. And so we were talking before you all entered the room about the rain last week, which happened. For those of you who don't live here, there was a lot of rain last week, and how it just can really take your operation sideways. And I've got the pictures up here of the frozen food too, so we can transition to Jeremy after you talk a little bit about the bad weather.
Yeah, so I mean, a great example would be just this last week. We had 2 days of like extreme rain. And up until then, everything had been smooth sailing because everything's ripening on time. We're going through it slowly and at the speed that we need to. Rain comes. We are a sustainable and organic grower. So there's a lot of things that conventional growers can do to have fruit hold up, when the environment changes. We don't have quite that same thing. We have the fact that we can freeze it, but our biggest constraint on that is labor. And we have to keep our retail business going, and then also, put in the overtime to be able to freeze a whole field because it got rained on and it won't last 2 days, you know. So that's one of the things that we have to still figure out, how to best do.
I think what's interesting is that, even if you try to freeze the surplus to preserve it, sometimes the order that you relied on doesn't necessarily come through the way you planned for it to come through. Am I right on that? Oh. And then we can pass it over to Jeremy, who's got a solution for that. So how nicely set up.
So normally we always freeze a lot of blueberries. That's the one product that we have in bulk that, we've always had a good frozen market for it. And we have a customer that usually buys anywhere between 25 to 30,000 pounds of frozen fruit from us every year. And this year, come December, they said, oh yeah, we'll be ready for it in January. We called them in January, no answer. We called them in February, no answer. And we realized, that they weren't going to take it. We got the denial from them. And luckily, as we're, talking about what people can do with surplus, I've known Jeremy for several years. Diane Dempster in the audience, also with the East West Food Rescue, Jeremy with Cascadia Produce. They came up with a solution for the surplus fruit, and they were able to work it out with, local food banks, hunger relief organizations, and we were able to take everything we had pretty much and get it out to people at a price that we could afford to give and we're happy with. And with that,
thanks. I'm just going to talk over here. Unless, is this on? Yeah. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass the clicker over. We've got to Jeremy to share. How many of you were on Jeremy's farm field trip yesterday? A few folks. Okay, great. So Jeremy, go ahead and take it away and talk about what you all do with your product, with surplus and rejected product.
That's not me, by the way. That is AI generated. I don't look like that. Also, Diane, don't worry. I'm not going to ask you to come up here. My name is Jeremy Vrablik, and I own Cascadia Produce. We are a wholesale produce company that I started about 8 years ago. I have 25 years of wholesale produce experience. I used to manage the Cisco Food Services account for the company that I was working at. We sold to a number of large places. Maybe you've heard of Safeway or Kroger or Charlie's Produce. They were all customers of ours at that place. I left and I started my own, and I started doing all wholesale, and things were going okay until the pandemic, and then we transitioned to doing more hunger relief under the Farmers to Family Food Box program. It was my first time ever contracting with any government entity. I was terrified. I had 2 employees and myself, so I had 3 employees, counting me. By the end of that contract, which spanned almost a year, we were producing 200,000 food boxes, distributing to all 39 counties in Washington state with a contract that was $5.5 million a month. We had 5 facilities that we had stood up in partnerships with farms throughout the state to be able to make that distribution happen. And then we continued on contracting now with the state of Washington, which that contract is coming to conclusion at the end of this month. But we also had a contract with Department of Commerce through Washington State with, at the time, it was Seattle Good Business Network. It is now Good Business Network of Washington and Cedar Grove Composting. And it was an industrial symbiosis grant, and it was all about receiving in rejected loads that are coming in from the retailers and finding a repurposing for them. Generally, it was going out into hunger relief organizations, those that had funding in order to be able to purchase the product, because the goal is always to be able to pay farmers. We are very specific about not wanting to take in any donations. One, we don't want to get in the way of that, but two, I believe that if you've done work, you should be paid for it, plain and simple. So the work that Kamal had done is to harvest all these berries and put them in a freezer, and then he needed a solution. And thankfully, there was some funding available from the state of Washington through a program called the Commodities Donation Grant Program, which I've just heard has changed names and is now switching over to a different department. That program was set up in order to work to reduce on-farm food waste. I don't know if there's another slide or not. Oh yeah, there it is. There's some rejected corn. That's actually in my cooler right now. But more specifically on Kamal's product, it was available, was identified as surplus, and through the contractors that had that funding, we were able to purchase his products, his frozen blueberries and raspberries and strawberries, and bring them to statewide distributors, and then that product was distributed out to individual agency food banks across the whole state. So there were people in Spokane, there were people in Richland, there were people in Vancouver. If you're not from Washington, I'm touching on all sides of the state here, that were receiving his berries. I'm happy that they actually continued on this funding. There was talk of ending it. And that's while nature throws curveballs at us all the time, like a couple of days of rain that really damage the possibilities of what can be done with that food. As we all know in this room here, funding also can do that same thing. And so I look at it as my job to make sure that I can be the creative solution to find markets so that farms can keep being farms. Because as it turns out, we really, really need them. And we really need them to be viable. Also, they're good people.
Thank you. That's a great segue to Dan. So Dan is also helping farmers stay viable, starting from the seed. We've heard about a bit of a low-tech solution. Dan and Timothy have a bit more high-tech solutions, so it takes the spectrum of solutions to tackle this issue. So Dan, take it away. If you can see your slides, wonderful. If not, we can.
Great.
move
Yeah,
around a
thank
bit.
you. Thanks everyone for coming today. It's great to be able to share our story at Clean Crop. And thank you, Kai, for putting together this great multidisciplinary panel. Yeah, my name is Dan White. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Clean Crop Technologies. We use something called cold plasma, which I'll explain in a minute, to reduce waste on farm through a number of different ways, but primarily through reducing losses to plant pathogens and reducing defect rates that are due to things like abiotic stress, things like drought, heat, other concerns. So a little bit of my background, I started working in agriculture in high school for a family orchard in Pennsylvania that was probably not that different than Kamal's farm. We were doing a lot of different incredible fruits and vegetables. We grew, among other things, tomatoes that looked a lot like those tomatoes that Kai shared, and really just fell in love with ag there. So worked with them through college, but spent most of my career after that working across a lot of different agricultural supply chains around the world. I worked in coffee and cocoa in Southeast Asia and spent a lot of time in post-harvest supply chains in sub-Saharan Africa. Worked a little bit in vegetable seeds there as well, which is where I first started working with seeds. And it's really been across all of these different experiences that my co-founder and I, about 8 years ago, developed the original thesis for what became Clean Crop. And it was really based on sort of a metaphor around the game Tetris. So can I get a show of hands? I assume most people here have played it or at least understand how it works, right? Yeah. Right. So for anyone that's played Tetris, you know that eventually you get to a level where the blocks get so varied and are moving so fast that you end up losing. And the way that I've experienced these different supply chains in agriculture is you can think about working on supply chain side, at least the way that it always felt to me was playing this really intense game of Tetris. where you're getting a lot of product coming in from different growers with different defect rates. There maybe something has some insect damage in it. Maybe something else is too small. It's off spec for one reason or another. And you have this constantly evolving set of customers on the offtake side who have their own QA requirements, who have their own specifications that are never perfectly matched up with each other. And so this is really hard in the supply chains where I spend most of my time in things like dry commodities like peanuts and coffee. But you can imagine that game of Tetris gets even faster when you're working with something that has such a short shelf life like blueberries. And so when we started Clean Crop, my partner and I, we started it from a premise of two things. One was we had seen and interacted with a lot of technology companies that claimed to be a silver bullet for these kinds of problems, and we firmly believed and still believe today that there is no silver bullet for any issues that we see in the supply chain. Every problem is going to have a lot of different contributors. And so the best thing that we think we can do as a technology provider for growers, for off-takers, is to really provide as many tools as possible so that at any given moment with any given lot of production, those growers have the right tool at hand to be able to solve the key problems that are preventing them from getting as much yield out of their field and as much food onto people's plates as possible. And so when we started the company, we initially were looking at a lot of different technologies that we thought could help structurally address at least the most common problems that we saw across the supply chains that we worked. We looked at things like UV light as a sterilization tool. We looked at high pressure pasteurization as something that had gotten a lot of applications in like meat that we thought might be able to cross-apply to some other areas. We looked at ozone treatment as a way to decontaminate a lot of mycotoxins, which was a big problem that we started looking at the beginning. And eventually we landed on this technology called cold plasma. And the way that it works is within that machine that you see there, we have a reactor that creates a really high voltage electric field. For the purposes of this discussion, all you need to know is it basically can pump a lot of extra energy into whatever air or gas we put into that chamber. So seeds get fed in through that hopper on the top. They get fed across this bed where they get exposed to these ionized gases, these energetic gases that we make from air. And we can tune those gases to do one of two things. We can tune them to rupture cell walls on fungus and bacteria. So where there are a lot of pathogenic pressures on seeds or on other products, we can inactivate them or degrade them to bring that seed or those foods back into specification for off-takers or for the supply chain. We can also use it, and this is actually an area where we have seen we've seen surprising connections in terms of reducing post-harvest losses from our customers. But we can also use it to do something called priming. And what that does is you can think about it as like a vaccination against in-field stress on the seed. So you can dose them, the seeds, with a lot of these ionized gases. That kind of wakes them up before they get planted, so that then if there's an early season drought or a heat snap, those seeds are better able to respond, which translates into better performance over the course of the season and less product that ends up out of specification at the end at harvest. So the upshot is we've been able to boost vigor by up to 8%. And so this is pretty broad spectrum here, from everything from spinach to tomatoes. Pretty broad spectrum decontamination as well for a lot of those pathogens that drive things like those defects you saw in the tomatoes in Kai's presentation, like the molds. And in the upshot has been across a lot of different crop types, we've been able to raise yields up to 20%. This is sellable yield, not just what's totally grown in the field. Critically, we do this without leaving any residues in the field, and we are organically certified. So as Kamal was mentioning, obviously organic growers have a lot fewer options in terms of that side of the treatment. And so we're able to provide them some level of control and preemption on these things. And so because we are treating product at the pre-planting phase, we have enormous leverage in terms of the impact that we're able to generate at the post-harvest phase. Because being able to shift that physiological arc for the seed at planting has massive impacts on total offtake. So this is just based on about 8,000 pounds of seed that we've treated over the course of the last 12 months. We've been able to unlock over 100,000 pounds of food waste averted. And again, this is through two different pathways. This is through recovering what otherwise would have been lost to blight in field, but also through increasing the percentage of produce that growers have that is in specification for their off-taker. And in this process, we've also been able to displace the amount of fungicidal coatings that have been going onto seeds, things like Thiram, I think now the number is over 1 million pounds. This was as of the end of April. And so we're really focused, first and foremost, on generating a ton of impact and value for grower customers in terms of revenue. But what has been really interesting has been seeing this play out as that produce ends up with people like Jeremy, where we're able to see more uniformity in terms of that final harvested product, particularly on things like leafy greens as a result of the treatment.
Thanks. That was really exciting and high tech. Cold plasma is not a term I knew before. Now I feel very, savvy on the scientific side. So Timothy is great to have us close out the discussion on the panelists because we've now heard from grower, the wholesaler, high tech seed solution, and now we're going to talk more about a high tech harvest level solution. And this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of possibilities of how we can reduce and get more yield from the field.
Thanks, Kai. I want to move over here so I can see the slides. It's really great to be here. Thanks, ReFed. Thanks for the team. And Dan, I love the Tetris analogy and what impact you're doing. That's really impressive. We have such a similar mindset of our approaches to things. It's been cool to get to know him. It's great to be here in Seattle. I used to live here, and one of the things that refreshes my liking of this place is the adherence and the reverence that they have for the indigenous cultures here, and even the namings of the rooms. It makes me feel good to be back here. So a little bit about us. I'm kind of a technologist. I've known some friends here in the audience for many years before I got into food as well. So I was kind of one of the early food tech people out there. My previous business was called Cho Chocolate, and we brought a technological approach to broken systems and old supply chains. And we're just taking the same thing we did there and to focus on what we're doing at Nutriate. So we went out to solve some of the biggest problems that we saw that was out there, and which was a lack of quality and nutrition in the current supply chain. Right? That's why I don't need to tell anybody in this audience why that's important. So why is that? Because the big girls and boys in the food business won't pay more for higher quality inputs, basically. Right? So the trick is, how do we get more nutrients in the supply chain? So that's what we set out about 12 years ago to solve for. And one of the things we did was focus on some core technologies. And so kind of what we do is we invent things, we license things, we build those things, we commercialize those things, and we deploy those things. And we went out to solve some of the biggest challenges of this problem. How do we get more nutrition in the supply chain? And one of the big parts of that is food waste, right? So as we know, it's got low input costs, and there's a lot of challenges on how to get that. So what we decided to do early on was focus on the post-production side streams first, get that dialed, and then go into in-farm waste. So post-production streams are beer, wine, juicing, for example. So we have deals with Jackson Family Wines, Sonoma Pharmaceuticals, Suja, et cetera, to take their stuff and stabilize it. So one of the biggest challenges that we focused on is that, okay, great, we've got low-cost, high-quality dehydration technology that we got from the USDA. We scaled that up. But the other big problem is, how do we stabilize these challenges, right? So, for example, even everything from food waste from fields, we know the problem he's got. Kamal is one of our, leading, shining examples of doing it the right way, where already doing freezing and storing that and do something with it. But what we've worked on is a system that allows us to quickly freeze stuff in the field or at a factory, et cetera, but a very small footprint. So I'm just I put some slides together to kind of talk about some of the, clicker, yep, right there. Thank you. So I just want to do some quick framing for later on for discussion. So basically the way we look at it is, we don't have a surplus problem, we have a stabilization problem, right? So there's, as we know, this whole conference is about how do we utilize the most out of what's lost. It's usually, it's not a quality issue, right? It's timing. It's either bad timing from the order, or et cetera. So what we're really trying to do is we're trying to buy time, right? So by stabilizing, we're buying time. Either stabilization is through freezing or dehydration. And then, how many folks here know why sometimes freezing can have more nutritious benefit than fresh? Anybody know? What is it? That's right. So what he's saying is absolutely correct. So as big ag is we pick things when they're not fully ripe, and that ripens the supply chain, not on the vine, but often with gases and ethylenes and stuff like that to help them ripen. But when they're farm fresh and they're at this ripest, it's the most highest nutrient loading. And if we're thinking about getting more nutrients in the supply chain, that's really important. And we kind of put this system together. We did about 1 million pounds this last harvest, and we just so fortunate to receive a grant from ReFed to make this fully mobile. And this is something that we're going to be moving out. Clicker. So I'm going to do a big push here real quick for regenerative agriculture. Why? Because it solves a whole bunch of these problems, right? One of them is by going more regen ag, you've got better nutrient density, the product is healthier, the skins are thicker, and it reduces food waste. And there's a lot more nutrition, what I said. But also, I'm going to cut through this, but I just can't advocate enough about us to lean into more regen practices because it's just generally healthier for everybody. So we just kind of, one of the things we say is right now the model is sell it or lose it. And the model is that the new thinking is we have to stabilize it where we can, process it as much as we can, and share the upside. So one of our models that we have as we work with farmers is that if we can get a ton of something and we can turn it into great high value and we're only paying X for it, they're not really receiving that value. So we come up with these progressive taxation models where we share in some of the upside benefit. The more value we can make from it, we'll share back with the farmers, right? So it's all about keeping the farmers in business and happy and growing. So what we again, I'm just reiterating a bunch of stuff here, stabilizing, converting, and sharing. And again, it's not just waste prevention, it's value creation. So that's kind of a little framing of the way we see the world, and I can answer other questions.
Do you have a slide on the chillinator?
Let's see. That is not the.
Yeah, one more.
No, that's one of our dehydration systems. That's the first one is farm size, fits in a container, and that is our more industrialized version of that. That's a 3-module of an 8-module unit. That's down in Mexico, dehydrating fruits. So we've got solutions that go from small to large, and then now we're going back small again. Now we went to large. So.
That's wonderful. And I think there's like a wealth of ideas on this just across our panel here. I'm sure there's a lot of questions you all might have, as well as ideas you have. So I hope that gave you a bit of a sampling for the scope of the issue, the reality, some of the opportunities, and I'd love to know what you all would like to know more about. Is there a mic that we can pass from the back of the room, a runner, or my mic person? Okay. Oh, yeah, there we go. Take one of these. Thank you. So I'm going to give the mic to Minnie, and as people, and would love to hear what you all would like to know more about before I ask questions, because I could take up the entire day with questions. Over here.
Thanks. Thanks for the panel. Good to see some familiar faces. I'm Connie Bowen with Farmhand Ventures. I want to, I guess, ask Kamal a question specifically. You talked about labor as being one of the challenges. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the cost of labor. Also, like, I used to farm blueberries, both organic and conventional, and my mind is blown at how many varieties you're managing. That's insane. But yeah, can you talk a little bit about get more in the weeds, I guess, on sort of some of the pricing logistic barriers, and anyone else can jump in on here too, because I know that it impacts everyone, but I am definitely a little bit on a mission to make it clear that crop loss is very much driven by it doesn't make economic sense to pull the stuff out of the field because we can't get margin on that. So.
Hello. So for us, labor is, it's 99% of the problem. If we've built everything up in a way, like you said, the close to 50 varieties, because first of all, we never really wanted to grow beyond what our local market is, because we can sustain that we have a crew of about anywhere from 15 to 20 harvest crew every year. On a good year it's 20, on like a COVID year it's 8. but we've tried to build it so that, you know, at any time, the maximum loss we can take is 1 to 2 varieties. You know, maybe we can't get to them on time or pick them fast enough. And for a lot of bigger farmers, it's a serious issue, you know, because you can't, if you have 20 acres of something that's ready to go, and then all of a sudden you have an issue with labor, there's nothing you can do. You know, you have a downpour that, you know, ruins half the fruit, you know, that only makes it harder for the harvest crew to pick through, because, you know, they have to pick quality over quantity. And really, labor is the biggest issue for us cost-wise, and, you know, just getting everything out of the fields on time.
Thanks, Kamal. Yeah, I mean, labor is a real constraint. Anybody else want to comment on that? Okay. Next question. Go ahead. Thanks, Minnie.
Hi, thank you. I'm Carolyn, and I'm with Ceres, and Ceres advocates for companies to take more action on climate change. Kai, this might be a question for you. I'm curious, because of the way and where food is lost in kind of from the harvest process through to packaging and other elements, how is there a role for companies to take responsibility, sort of some of the more downstream CPGs, retailers, or whatever it might be? Is there a role for them to take more responsibility in supporting farmers upstream to reduce those emissions? How does that accounting work out? And is there a way that we can get companies to take more responsibility in supporting all of these emission reductions?
I mean, it's a great question, with which we could talk about more afterwards as well. The short answer would be that no. I work with businesses, so you know I get the business mentality. No business wants to put their farmer out of business, right? Because then they have no business. So there's a vested interest in the buyers working with their suppliers to a point, right? And I think one of the big opportunities is actually that data opportunity to get more understanding of how much is actually left in the field. Like, so this tomato example, the fresh market can't take any more of the too ripe or too small greens, but a pickling cannery type of CPG could potentially. But if you have, that's the beauty of the summit, is you need the system in the room to say, like, first of all, how much is there? What does it look like? Is it a consistent enough volume to do something with it that makes sense for financially for the farmer and for the business? So there's quite a lot of work being done by World Wildlife Fund and ReFed and others on whole chain studies. There's great work done in Australia, as well as in the UK. And these whole chain studies try to tackle that, to say, like, let's bring in the buyers and the customers. And I've been involved with a project on, like, potatoes and also with strawberries. It's been part of these case studies that Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment has out there. And once you have the system in the room talking to each other, you know, the data unlocks that conversation. And that's really, it seems so basic, and it is basic. And companies want to do, you know, nobody goes to work saying, I want to trash the planet, right? Companies are made up of people, so they want to do the right thing, and they want to feel like they're supporting suppliers. So we can, again, talk further. Anybody else want to chime in? Good.
I think what ends up happening is that what you want to see is a creative approach. And when a company gets so big that they have to streamline everything that they do and they can't be creative, or it becomes counter to what the business is. So at a retailer, you have a QC person on the dock. That's what they do. That's it. So that corn that came in, that was rejected, that came to my warehouse, it was the QC person looking at it going, there's dimpling on this corn and there's damage on the cut end. Now, if they had just left it in the husk, they wouldn't have had those issues. They would have maintained the moisture and you wouldn't have a cut end. But somebody made the decision that this corn has to come to us on a styrofoam tray, plastic wrapped. And the QC person only looks at that, right? And so we're able to sit back and take a more a broader view of it instead of looking through that pinhole of just being QC and going, well, one, that was a dumb decision to put it on on styrofoam first, right? But then secondly, it's okay. You're going to have damage on the cut end, right? And also, what are other creative ways that we can take this product that doesn't fit into this hole and find a market for it? Because again, somebody grew that, somebody spent time, labor, hopefully they used some of your technologies on it, so they were able to reduce some of the pesticides and chemicals that were used, but it was all spent, right? And so we want to be able to get funding back to those growers for what they've done. But it's hard to get, you have to look at it from a more holistic approach and identify secondary markets, which is, in our small scale of what we try to do here, that's what we look for, right? Like the stuff that falls through the cracks, the stuff that didn't make sense. We got in some bell peppers because the sizing wasn't exactly the same. They're fine. The bell peppers were fine, but it's taking that look back and going, okay, it doesn't fit this spec, but where's another place for it to go to? And honestly, the buyers at a big retail facility, that's not their job, right? Their job is to make sure that product shows up on time, that hopefully it passes QC, but that's the QC person. They can't worry about that. And it goes out to the shelves. That's their job. And so the broader view is needed.
I'd like to pick up on that thread for just a minute. Anybody in the room who's a buyer want to talk about the reality of buying? I mean, there are different roles. If your job is QC and you're incentivized by making sure that nothing arrives at the store that's going to spoil, then become a waste for the retailer, what else could be done? Anybody want to be brave enough to talk about, as a buyer, what the realities are, constraints, opportunities? And that's okay. If nobody wants to do that or has input. Go ahead, Timothy.
So one of the things we do is we work with large people to get their side streams out the dock to us. These negotiations take a year sometimes because identification, risk, all sorts of stuff, right? This is the challenge, is because there's a misalignment of incentives inside the organizations in order to put somebody behind a QC person. So it's not like the question is, what can they do? There has to be a reprioritization of the incentives of the people that are doing the work. Because folks, you've run into challenges saying like, this sounds great, C-level suite wants to do it. When you get down to the middle and people running the dock, their bonuses aren't tied into helping you get this, couple truckloads out of this stuff, right? It's not gonna happen. So it's actually requires systemic change inside the change management side of those organizations. So what we have found is the incentives to get them to do that is to convince the top level, saying, by doing things the right way, you increase your brand value with your customers. That offset for doing the things the right way, the brand increase, is more than enough to pay for the internal resources to do it. That's the bottleneck. So every organization that we've seen so far has kind of this general problem. And so it needs to have assigned people that have incentives and motivations to do so. That otherwise it's called the clay layer. You can't get through it, right?
And Summer has a question. Well, Minnie, can you? Oh, sorry, over here first, and then up to Summer. Okay.
Thanks. Just really quickly, Dan, I'm curious, when you are selling to your customers, what are the most compelling narratives? Because your product solves for a lot of issues, food waste being one that we really care about, but also pesticides and decreased inputs, right? And so obviously you want to have that cost argument, but I'm just curious, we heard this morning, food waste can be a Trojan horse issue. That's fine, as long as we solve it. But is it food waste, or is it reduced pesticides, anything like that?
Yeah, it's neither of those. I think what's been interesting, we started the company back in 2020, so we've been operating now for 5 years, and obviously been doing customer discovery the whole time, particularly within the vegetable markets. And most within vegetables, our primary markets today are within leafy greens. So you can think about all the baby leafy spinach and lettuce and cilantro, things like that. So these are all, these are crops, short cycle crops. And the way that these supply chains tend to work with these grower packer shippers is they'll be producing 12 months out of the year, right? If you have a contract with Cisco or Kroger's or whomever, that's the name of the game. You have to be able to supply consistently every month. And the way that they have done this historically is you'll manage acreage up and down, the coast. You'll go from Michigan, Florida, Arizona, California, and you'll just have your teams move up and down harvest cycles depending on the time of year. Where we've actually seen the highest growth in demand has been just mostly because of this increasing challenge of heat in some of these shoulder seasons in Arizona and Florida. They're seeing really steep declines in yields as a function of the fact that they used to be able to reliably plant in August, and now that's becoming less and less viable. They're not able to get some of these cooler crops like iceberg lettuce into the field successfully as early as they need to maintain those offtake contracts. And so again, getting back to that idea of like just helping them play this Tetris game better, our goal is, can we provide tools, and cold plasma treatment on seeds is a tool, but it's certainly not the only one, but can we systemically provide enough tools to growers such that as conditions get worse, as they're going to over the next several decades, we can, through a combination of breeding and a combination of ex-post treatments like ours, offset some of that narrowing of the production windows. That's going to be really important. So we've actually seen germination enhancement in the face of heat stress is the number one problem that growers see today, and that was probably the number 2 or 3 problem when we started the company in 2020.
Wow. So many aspects to unpack. Did you want to ask? All right, we've got a question over here. We'll start in the back. Can you stay in the back for a second? Okay.
Hi there. Daniel, if I may continue with you, who is paying for the premium of the seed? Are you providing the seed, and is the farmer paying the premium, given that there's like a built-in assumption that yields will increase?
It depends on, we have different models, but in general, the farmers, our goal is to provide the technology as a cost reduction tool. So any application where we go into these markets, we're either selling the seed on parity with other distributors, and we're able to do that by, we make our margin off of that difference between the wholesale and the retail price. In others, it's a service fee that is displacing other service costs, often at a lower price point. So if we're able to reduce their overall seed treatment cost, we are able to capture either on a one-to-one basis or a little bit of a discount what they would be paying otherwise for some of those more persistent coatings and treatments.
Got it. Yeah.
Thanks, Minnie. Can we make our way up? There's a gentleman here and then a woman up further up.
Hi, thank you for all the information. I want to get a little in the weeds, so to speak, on the Kroger styrofoam corn. If I understand right, that the farmer hasn't been paid by the time it's packaging in that? Is that the idea, or is it actually a contract issue?
It would be, because there's a quality issue on that corn, that grower has not been paid yet, so it enters, when it comes to us, it's on a consignment. And so the determination for what goes back to the grower, my understanding with the packing house would be, and the packing house is actually the grower in particular for this corn, is that they get paid based off of whatever comes back from it. So there's a certain amount of inflationary pressure that comes about from these rejections as well, because if a grower knows that 5% of everything that they ship out is going to get rejected, we hope it's not that high, but it's picked a number, right? They're going to build that cost into the other 95% that they know will land. And so they're trying to make themselves whole. Farmers are smart. They're business owners. They are tractor runners. They are mechanics. They are accountants. They're doing all of this. They understand what this is. So it gets built into it. Our solution for trying to assist is basically that loss that they've had, try to reduce it as much as possible.
And so they actually went vertical into the processing as a value add to the production, and so they took over that additional vulnerability in the market.
Yeah, grower, packer, shipper.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think this might be the final
Yep.
question that we have time for, but I encourage everyone to keep having this conversation as we go to lunch.
Hi, this question's for Daniel. I'm Abby Beisinger with Seattle Culinary Academy and Viva Farms, but previously a plant pathologist with the University of Connecticut. And I'm wondering if you could speak to the benefits of your cold plasma technology versus something as rudimentary as hot water seed treatment. And hot water seed treatment, organic growers can execute on their farms themselves. So what was the benefit to going with your technology instead?
That's a great question. We've done some work with the hot water lab at UConn, so familiar with benchmarking there. So the key advantages that we have over hot water, and this is true also for most of the other competitive seed decontamination tools that are chemical rinses, is it's a dry treatment. And that has two advantages. One, it's way less stressful on the seed. So hot water treatment, you're right, growers can theoretically do it on their own. When we talked to the extension team at UConn, they said that they estimate that, even based on the recommendations that they've had, growers will often overtreat as much as 30% of the time, crashing the germination on the seed, because it's really hard to dial it in precisely without the right equipment and technician training. So we're able to achieve a much higher degree of precision so that you're not able to overtreat as easily with a dry treatment. And also these hot water treatments. So if a grower's doing it, it's one thing, but it's still labor, which we know is very constrained on farms. Every hot water or aqueous treatment we've seen requires you to touch the seed 6 times and can often take days between initial treatment and then drying the seed, so that if you dry too fast, you kill the seed. If you dry too slow, it starts to germinate. So we're able to achieve very similar results as hot water in terms of decontamination in minutes of treatment in a fully automated system. So you can have a fractional technician running the machines, and as soon as the seed comes out, you can then take it on for further processing or planting without having to wait for it to dry back.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks a lot, Dan. And unfortunately, we are at time, so I do want to respect the fact that we are going into lunch. Thank you all for being here to listening to this wonderful panel. I'm going to use a new term too. Like, how we always say there's no silver bullet for food loss and waste, but there are lots of silver seeds. So silver seeds are the answer. Not whether you get them from Dan or elsewhere, but buckshot, no, silver seeds. It's all about farming and food. So thank you for your time, thank you for your energy, and we look forward to more conversations.